Welcome to this short video about Robert Gray's poem Harbour Dusk. So before we start to actually engage with the poem, I'd like to start thinking about whether you have sort of walked around Sydney Harbour at dusk, and how did this place in particular make you feel? And think back, like, what is the color of the sky? And as we've previously sort of talked about before when we examine texts, color reflects mood, reflects an atmosphere. And sometimes we look at the color of the sky, but we don't actually necessarily sort of engage with what mood is being conveyed. But if you think back about a time you could have been in Harbour Dusk, the Sydney Harbour at dusk, with the color of the sky, what mood has been conveyed to you? And sort of what are the contrasts between the harbour and the city? Like how could the harbour seem like as an escape, that moving away from the city into that sort of natural world? And if you can think about it, what strikes you as you look out across the harbour? So when you read through the poem, you got to start thinking about the big ideas, the big concepts that you could sort of link back to your understanding of Robert Gray's suite of poetry here in Coast Road. You got to start thinking about, could you sort of link some of the big ideas between this poem and, Journey North Coast, or Description of a Walk, or indeed Flames and Dangling Wire? Or is there a contrast there, perhaps? So when you read through the poem, as always, try and consider how Gray uses poetic and language devices, structure, and the use of sound, all to create a sense of meaning here for its responder. And when we look at the poem itself, what I'm going to get you to do is I want you to read it a few times now yourself once I stop speaking. So you can pause this video and then you can sort of read through it yourself. But think about how through this four stanza poem, how does the persona's ideas about the harbour, how have they been organized? What effect does this have on the persona, the place, the mood? And is there like a tone, a sound pattern within this poem? If you look at the copy that's here in front of you, there are some different colored letters here that could sort of lean you in that direction. And how does this sort of help convey a message or a feeling or an atmosphere, indeed, of the poem? And again, when we look at the structure of the poem and the form of it, how does that help altogether to reinforce its meanings? So pause this video once I stop speaking, just so you can read the poem 3 times. Read the first time just to go through it, see if you can understand what's happening. Second time, look at the poetic language, its devices. And the third time, just try and solidify your understanding and how Gray is trying to convey his message. So if we look at the overview of this poem, yes, it is written in first person perspective. And I think that this allows us to sort of engage with the place as it's being described, okay? So we get a sense from this perspective that does the persona feel isolated through the empty park, a huge moist hush, they seem to whisper, or at times unhappy, that melancholy, the evening confessional. But this first person perspective, along with the evocative imagery, leads us to the conclusion that the persona is at the location and or has been here before. Okay, and again, this setting seems to have desolate imagery, and it gives the impression of being uninhabited and not nice anymore. Descriptions such as an empty park and empty fields solidify our belief that this is not as bustling as it should be, and it kind of gives us a sense of confusion, as it should be a little bit more lively. So I think it's most likely that this persona, is he thinking back to a time when he wandered through the park and along the harbour with the she that he references in the opening line, the she and I, which they are no longer us, which could dictate indeed that, there's a sense of despair and sadness here, that this is the beginning of the end of their relationship together. And this realization can be quite confronting. And when we look at the color and tone, it does, as we all know, it plays a significant role in defining the mood of a scene. When you have an overcast sky, what does that convey? So the first stanza, the she and I, as I've said, this shows a separation between the two. Makes us question, who is she? But this, in the first stanza, he states fading life. So this personification refers to life is fading and accentuates the slow decline in life and indeed perhaps their relationship. And of course, the third stanza talks about the yachts were far across the empty fields of water, referring to that motif of isolation and disconnection from that first stanza. And the tone in the first stanza and throughout the poem is one of reflection and, well, both two of reflection and rest. And this is established through the verb choices in stanza 1 and of course then the verb choices in stanza 3, which suggests that there is a peace during these moments of melancholy. Okay, so it is reflection and rest, but there is peace during that sense of melancholy. Okay. And when we look at the color and tone, there is a motif of this throughout the poem. We know through Gray's images style, his use of color is exemplary in conveying his meaning and message. And the shifting in tonal colors continued as a motif for the persona's relationship. So these colors represent the setting in which the persona is in, and it affects the mood of the relationship. So the aubergine dark harbor reflects the romanticized setting as dusk is approaching, and reflects the title of the poem as the vivid imagery sort of gives us, a sense that this is Sydney Harbour at dusk. Okay. And then in stanza 2, he contrasts, as he does so well, the natural versus man-made world to the fruit shop bright lights and the beauty of the sunshine, the sunset. Like with the fruit shop bright lights, this is sort of talking about the vast array of colors that are emanating from the city, and they could be construed as being quite garish and quite invasive, so to speak. Okay. And I'm just outlining some significant ideas evident here in Harbour Dusk. Now, the way that I've structured these sort of points in this dot point format is kind of representative of how we'd like you to sort of create your sentences within your body paragraph, right? You can see there's a nice flow here. Now, obviously, you can add in content and explore this in greater detail, but this is a way that we should be looking to sort of mimic within our writing. And I think that in his poem, one of the main ideas is, again, the notion of isolation, sustained by use of imagery and constant development of the setting through the character's walk. Again, movement near the harbour. The main idea is you're looking at how things fade and crumble over time. Okay, so you're talking about Gray's description of nature falling apart, which could also be representative of the persona and she and their relationship and its nearing end. He's talking about how he sustains this in each stanza by writing about a stone parapet's fading life, a crumbling bush, as well as going to an evening confessional. But his intention is to connect us with the story by evoking fond memories of a more familiar setting for us here. And he does do this by bringing in that sort of looking at the color motif through the stories. It describes the ocean as oily, aubergine dark, and of course then the city as that sort of fruit shop, bright, that horrible, garish, emanating visual affliction. And as always, you got to talk about the impact, the effect. Okay, so we'll look at the imagery, the natural imagery that Gray uses within his work. We can see that the overcast sky, the empty fields of water, oily aubergine dark of the harbour. This conveys the mood of the persona. Okay, which is reflected back on us, which allows us to interact with the images. And as Gray does, he's connecting ideas and objects with the landscape. Okay, the landscape. And the objects that he's used to reference the harbour bridge itself in the last stanza, the strong bridge and how it represents a cloven sail. But again, main idea is one of relationships and how they can fall away and they can sort of lead to a human isolation. And this is represented through the landscape he's conveying and, of course, the interactions that the persona has with with that said landscape. So we do get that continuous sort of notion that Gray likes to bring in this interplay between the landscape, objects and ideas, so the physical with the spiritual. So now we're going to go through each stanza in the poem, line by line. Okay, so feel free to pause this as we go, and you can take this as one or an interpretation of this poem. It's not the be all and end all sort of um, only interpretation of this poem, but it is one interpretation that is designed to help you sort of come to an understanding that becomes your own as well. So let's look at it. Stanza one. She and I came wandering there through an empty park, and we laid our hands on a stone parapet's fading life. Before us, across the oily aubergine dark of the harbour, we could make out yachts. And it continues into the next stanza where it says, beneath an overcast sky that was mauve underlit against a far shore of dark crumbling bush. However, we're going to focus on stanza one, Harbour Dusk. Again, it's set at dusk, setting at the time when the light is fading. It mirrors the fading of the relationship between she and I. Dusk is a romantic time, but it can also be sadness. But it's absolutely beautiful at this time of the day. And wandering suggests an activity that they used to participate in together. But wandering also suggests a sort of a stroll without any sort of agreed destination. It just, if it ends, it ends. Okay. Again, wandering to an empty park suggests a sense of peace, serenity, but also isolation, melancholy, or indeed both. Okay. And we laid our hands on a stone parapet's fading life. Again, this is a joint activity. This could have been something that they've done before, but the choice of the verb laid creates a tone of rest and relaxation throughout the poem. It's sustained, I should say, throughout the poem. And laying of the hands suggests this kind of religious or ceremonial feel, or something that has happened before a number of times, and they still continue to do it. Even though their relationship is probably coming to an end. So it's just that something that they do out of habit, one would say. On a stone parapet's fading life, the personification of the stone parapet and the enjambment accentuates the slow decline in life. So you got to ask yourself, is the parapet fading in color and physicality, or is it fading from view due to the darkness that's coming? But either way, it suggests the end of something for the narrator, possibly his romantic relationship. And before us, across the oily aubergine dark of the harbour, we could make out yachts. And again, colour is a motif used through the poem, and the accumulation of the adjectives oily with aubergine and dark, they link to the title of the poem. And this creates the impression of a dark but glistening harbour, something that is beautiful to see. So again, Gray uses interesting choices in nouns as adjectives, like he did in description of a walk. So the oily aubergine dark of the harbour, we could make out yachts. Life, there's activity in the distance. And as we move on to stanza 2, we can make out yachts beneath an overcast sky that was mauve underlit against a far shore dark crumbling bush. So the overcast and underlit and dark crumbling focuses on this, again, sense of darkness within the scene and possible mood of the scene. The adjective of crumbling may allude to the vulnerability of the natural environment. Part of the city to our left, again, the periphery. Okay, we've met this before. Okay, part of the city to our left was fruit shop bright. So this metaphor, this fruit shop bright accentuates like the vast array of colours, as I've said before, within the city. Probably too bright, garish, invasive perhaps, in comparison to the beauty of the natural world. And after the summer day, a huge, moist hush. And this suggests that the heat of the day has drawn the buzz and life out of the city, leaving it a bit sticky and lifeless. But also note the sound of bush. They have crumbling bush and moist hush. This creates this soft and gentle sound. The stanza 3, the yachts were far across the empty fields of water. One, at times, was gently rested like a quill. They seemed to whisper, slipping amongst each other, always hovering as though resolve were ill. So the yachts, again, they were across the empty fields of water. Empty, again, this sense of quiet, peace. It could also be isolation. And then one, at times, was gently rested like a quill. Now, a quill, one of those old school writing tools um, that individuals used to pluck from a large bird. And then, of course, the quill, the end that doesn't have feather on it, was dipped into an inkwell. And then, of course, the people used to write using that quill. So it's giving the impression here that this yacht was gently rested like a quill. Okay, so it's waiting for interaction. It's waiting for a human to actually sort of engage with it again. So the simile, like a quill, provides this vivid image of this slanted, peaceful, and elegant movement through the water. And the quill kind of creates, as I said, creates this image of the yachts as paused in the writing of their own story, waiting to continue their experience once human interaction occurs again. And this gently rested again sustains a tone of rest and relaxation here. And they seem to whisper, slipping amongst each other, always hovering as though resolve were ill. The personification of the yachts seem to whisper brings another element of the harbour to life. They're in harmony with each other as they move elegantly, gracefully around each other, always hovering, suggesting they're free, undecided, unconstrained. And it continues that personification of them waiting and being ready for when human interaction begins once more. And stanza 4, final stanza. Away off through the strung bridge, a sky of mulberry and orange chiffon, mauve grey, each cloven sail, like nursing sisters in a deep corridor, so melancholy are nuns going to an evening confessional. So the strung bridge, this capitalization suggests that this is the Harbour Bridge, suggests that it is. But could we argue that the poem is limiting to an audience that only knows and can make links between the images here and their own experiences in and around the Harbour Bridge? Or is Gray kind of allowing for the experience to be shared more universally with that capitalization of just the bridge and not mentioning the Harbour Bridge, the Sydney Harbour Bridge? A sky of mulberry and orange chiffon. So we can see that time has passed as the poem develops. Again, the sense of movement through all of Gray's poetry suggests this changing red, purple, orange tones of the sky. The use of the metaphor chiffon provides vivid imagery of the similar texture of the clouds and the interwoven array of colours in the sky. So these colours are both sumptuous but fleeting because they don't last all the time. If they did, it wouldn't be that beautiful. So does this possibly mirror the persona's experience of joy in life? And the mauve grey, this is showing that the sky is turning colour again because it's turning its final stages before it hits darkness. And each cloven sail like nursing sisters. Now the word cloven, okay, it's used as an adjective which could refer to the curved outline shape of the yacht's sails or the architectural sails of the Sydney Opera House. And the simile comparing the sails to nursing sisters or nuns further dates back to the writing of this poem, back in the days when nursing sisters, those who feed little babies, okay, like they carried these rank, stiff, starched white veils and breezed through the wards like ships under sails. And if this is inspired by the Sydney Opera House, there are some sails that are tilted open towards the sky, giving an expression of joy, but there are others that bow into themselves, appearing to be melancholy. Okay? So like nursing sisters in a deep corridor, some melancholy. So this could be the nuns reflecting the melancholy of the nuns, reflecting the melancholy of the speaker, or indeed the sails that we see in the opera house, or nuns going to an evening confessional. The image of these nuns emphasizes this peaceful nature of the scene, the purity, the holiness of nature, free of sin. It's an escape for us. It also could raise the question of whether the speaker has something to confess. Is there something he may not be saying? Could this be linked to the deterioration in the relationship of she and I that we have met in line 1 of stanza 1? Perhaps. Either way, that was just an interpretation of Robert Gray's Harbour Dusk poem. Hopefully you took some ideas from this video. As I said, take these ideas as a stimulus for you to continue to delve deeper into the intricacies of the poem and Gray's context and come up with your own interpretation.